Your journey has been an interesting one up to here. You've questioned so much more than those around you. You've even questioned yourself as to how you could have grown into these thoughts. Am I crazy? When did I begin to think differently? Why do people in general appear so limited in their thought process? Rest assured, you are not alone. The world is slowly waking up to what you already know inside, yet can't quite verbalize. Welcome to the Spiritual Dope Podcast, the show that answers the questions you never even knew to ask, but needed the answers to. Questions about you, this world, the people in it. Most importantly, how do I proceed now moving forward? We don't claim to have all the answers, but we sure do love living in the question. Time for another hit of Spiritual Dope with your host, Brandon Henley. Let's get right into today's episode.
Hey there, Spiritual Dope. I'm on today with Christian de la Huerta. We are on here today, and Christian is a sought-after spiritual teacher, personal transformation coach, and leading voice in the Breathwork community. He's traveled the world offering inspiring and transformational retreats, combining psychological and spiritual teachings with lasting and life-changing effects. An award-winning, critically acclaimed author, he has spoken at numerous universities and conferences on the TEDx stage. His new book, Awakening the Soul of Power, was described by multi-Grammy Award winner Gloria Estefan as a balm for the soul for anyone searching for the truth and answers to life's difficult questions. Christian, thanks for being on today.
Hey, Brandon. Thanks so much for having me. I really been looking forward to this conversation.
Fantastic. Well, so I like to start this off with the whole idea that, and I think you even mentioned it in one of your lines, like we are conduits for the universe's energy to come through. And the idea is that you and I are going to have this conversation that you and I have, but there's going to be somebody listening that's only going to pick up on like this message being delivered through the universe, through you, to them today. What is that message, Christian?
Well, before I get into that, I just want to say that I really appreciate your sense of spiritual irreverence. I very much appreciate it, and it cracked me up. Some of your comments on your website. I think if we were going to wrap up the message into one short description, is like there is a way that we can step into our power, into our personal power, in a way that is a match for who we are. Because most of us, I think, are conflicted about that. We have an ambivalent relationship to power. We want it, but we're afraid of it. And I think at the core, we're afraid that if we really stepped into all of our power, all of our potential, that other people would be threatened by us or be afraid of us, or, we would end up alone. And we've also been conditioned to believe that power is a bad thing, like with quotes like power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so what good-hearted person wants to be corrupted or wants to abuse power, which is what we see out in the world all the time. So add to that mix. And by the way, what they forgot to tell us about that power corrupts quote is that Lord Acton was speaking specifically about political power, not the personal power that we're talking about. But when you combine all of that with the fact that we have been conditioned to be afraid of the emotions, somebody along the way had this brilliant idea that the emotions were weakness. And especially for us as men, we were conditioned, little boys don't cry, and, like man up, and all these other kind of twisted definitions of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. So when you put all that into a mix, we hate confrontation, we hate conflict. And what happens is we end up giving our power away, our innate power that nobody can give to us, nobody can take away. We are the only ones who can give it away. And what is saddest to me is that we give it away for really lame reasons. Like we give it away and we settle for less. We play small. We hide our light under a bushel. We say yes when inside we feel no. And for reasons like an illusion of security or false sense of acceptance or morsels of pseudo love. And so that's the message, that there is a way that we can step into power that is a match for who we are, and that it doesn't require for us to push anybody down, to step on them, to abuse them, to take advantage of them, to manipulate them, to use force or fear, but that there is a way that we can express our power that is a natural expression of who we are.
So I think that It's funny. I actually copied that Marianne Williamson line out again last night while I was reading your book. It's not that we're afraid of how small we'll be. It's we're afraid of how great our power actually is. And I think that's kind of what you're talking to in here, and that we give it away so easily, and for all of like these kind of wrong reasons. What was it for you along your journey that awakens your personal soul of power? That we're talking about your book as well. What was it that woke up your soul, and gave you kind of privy notice to it?
Well, I think my initial wake up point was breathwork some 30 years ago. And I'd had some experiences with mind expanding substances that also kind of, had a phase of experimentation when I was when I was in college, and that began a process of questioning reality, the worldview. I was raised in a very Catholic environment, so that combined with a class in existentialism began a process of questioning. I think it was when I did breath work, it just changed everything. I was on a track to get a PhD in psychology. My dad was a psychiatrist, so I come out of that tradition. When I did breathwork for the first time, I jumped tracks. I never went for the PhD, and I've been like, I knew after one session that I'd never be the same, and I wasn't. My life took a different direction. Within 6 months, I quit my last corporate job.
That's awesome. I think that breathwork for me has been very revelatory as well. I had had several instances of brain expansive substances. I think that's how you title it. But the deal is that, and that's a real big, the name of the podcast, Spiritual Dope. You can get to that space and a place of this hit of spirituality by doing like something like breath work, right? So what did you do then? I mean, so you're like, I'm out on the corporate gig, and where did you head then after that? I'm just curious. Yeah.
Well, I ended up doing an ashram experience with a teacher that I met from whom I learned breath work originally. So I studied with her for 5 years in for the most part, monastic setting. I had a few deviations from that, but could really count them on one hand in 5 years, which, by the way, was a really empowering experience for me. To begin to reel in my sexual energies and the way that I related to other people with that sexual energy. And that was incredibly difficult time of my life. It was very demanding, not only the lifestyle, but the opportunities for letting go of my preferences and my desires. And like, I wouldn't want to do it again, but I'm really grateful that I did, because I wouldn't be who I am if it wasn't for that experience.
I get it. It's letting go and spending a lot of space. But what would you say though was like the most difficult part, right? Because you're kind of in there and you're doing it on your own. You're wanting this, right? What made that? I guess
very difficult. Good interview questions, Brandon. If you would have asked me before, I would have thought it would have been the celibacy thing.
Mm-hmm. Because that was my first thought going into that too, right? Like,
it wasn't even close to the hardest thing. In fact, I was in such existential kind of level of survival, because this teacher was brilliant and she was a ruthless ego slayer. So I think what was most difficult was being in because we were at the same time going through some challenging times out on the physical world. And it's a longer story that we don't have time to get into here, but it was to maximize it. At one point, we were homeless. We lived in the car for a week. and in San Francisco, and we would take showers in at the YMCA in the morning for $4. And at the same time that she was going through some profoundly transformational experience, which didn't make her very functional in this realm. So, put all that, the fact that she was, my ego was being incredibly threatened, that I was in survival level, like so much of my identity up until this time had been connected to my worldly success. And suddenly here I am, like barely living in a car for a week. And feeling so responsible for everything, and at the same time, like surrendering, and in the teacher, in the guru disciple model, you're surrendering to the sacred, but through this person of the guru that's right in front of you, who was at times irrational, and so that's the part that that to me was most difficult. That was. Because you're basically surrendering your desires, your preferences, like even your perceptions.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole psychological play, right? I mean, here you are working with this, right? And then you're working with this guru, and to attain, a certain level, a certain experience. I don't know, but then they're a mess, and you're like, what the hell am I doing? I mean, that's where my head would be. And then also you've got your psychology background, right? So you're like doubling down because where the razor cuts.
Yeah. And I mean, and I'm, with all due respect, I'm not putting her down. Like I really value, I got incredible teachings from her, and the opportunity for surrender was mine. Like I did that. Nobody could do that for me. And that's, that's the most profound experience that I got from that, in addition to learning trust. At a cellular level. It was like my relationship with life became incredibly trusting, because no matter how bad things got, like we're down to just like the storage unit in Hawaii and San Francisco and Los Angeles, and like there was nothing else to pawn, and money would show up unexpectedly from just an unexpected source, just at the right time. We never missed a meal. Like, yeah, it was rough. It was very rough, but we never missed a meal. So that I got to learn that at a cellular level. It's not something that I could read in a book. To know that I'm going to be fine, that I'm going to be taken care of.
The idea of providence. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. No, I love it. I love it. So in your book, it covers quite a bit. And one of the things that you cover in there that I think is really important, especially in today's day and age, and the spiritual guy too, right? As a spiritual guy, but like, what does a healthy masculine power look like? Actually, I'm going to wind that back for 1 second. Kind of identify what power is, like in your, what is power, and then what's a healthy masculine power?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. You're asking some really good questions, some of which nobody has asked me before. I've done dozens and dozens of interviews, of podcasts. Nobody has asked me this stuff yet. This one, yeah. But you're asking really good ones. So in order to reconcile, the way that we reconcile this ambivalent or conflicted relationship we have with power, one of the ways around that is to realize that we're talking about different kinds, right? So there's worldly power or egoic power, ego power, which we tend to associate, like the way the world looks at power, we tend to associate with people who have money, who have fame, who are high up in some kind of hierarchy, whether it's a corporate ladder or some kind of religious organization or whatever it is. But the thing about all those kinds and expressions of power is that because they're outside of us, they're here today, they're gone tomorrow. Whereas the other kind of power that I'm pointing to is internal. It's, I'm calling it soulful power, it's spiritual power, call it what you wish, right? It doesn't matter what we call it, but it's the power that is inherent to each one of us. And again, like, no one can give it to us. No one can take it away. And whereas worldly power always has an agenda and is very self-serving. It's always trying to get something for itself. The other kind of power, spiritual power, what to me is authentic power, it's humble. It doesn't need to prove anything to anybody, and it's about service. It's about making a difference. So I think about a Gandhi or a Gandalf, in their monastic robes and their stupid sandals, as you would say, and their sandal feet, you would never know, like you would never know how much power they hold until it's called for. And then, watch out. Like Gandhi brought the British Empire to its knees at the point when it was at its highest point in terms of global reach and global influence without landing a single punch or shooting a gun. It's like, talk about power. And so that's what I mean by soulful powers. It's the kind of power that's from within, that it's like worldly power believes that it comes from a place that it's a zero-sum game, right? So that there's a limited amount. Your having power threatens mine. Whereas what I'm saying is like, wait a minute, if I'm in my power, if I know who I am, it's like, why would I be threatened by you having power? It's like, I'm not threatened by that. It's like, I know no matter what you or anybody else does, I know that I've got it. I can handle it. I can show up and respond appropriately to whatever that situation is. So why would I be threatened by anybody having power? I can celebrate somebody else's power. And so it's about power with rather than power over, which has been the traditional patriarchal masculine, like toxic masculine way of expressing power, which our relationship to, which, reflects in our relationship to the planet and our relationship to life, which is basically you fuck it or you kill it.
Right? I mean, there's a game they right? Right? What's the fucking kill it, keep it, whatever. It is true. Then that's the I think the historic chase, right? Fuck it or kill it. So what is the healthy masculine power look like then? And real quick question: are we? Sub question is: are we on pace to like get there in our lifetime?
Yeah, that's a good question. That I don't have an answer to. I see a lot of change though. I see a lot of men who are just not threatened. A lot of straight guys who tell each other, I love you, and kiss each other on the cheek, and they're not threatened by that. Like, it doesn't mean anything to one's masculinity. So this book, it's for everybody, but it has a particular message for women, stemming from my belief that the empowerment of women is like the single most important thing that needs to happen in the world. It's not to idealize women. It's not to put women up on a pedestal. It's not to give women more shit that they got to clean up and do. It's because as a planet, as a species, we've been running very off balance where it comes to power and gender and sacred masculine and feminine energies. And I believe that when women are in 50% of power in this world, because I don't believe that we need to go back to matriarchy. I don't think that's what we need. I think we need balance inside each one of us and in the world between the masculine and the feminine. And so that when women are in 50% of power in the world, we're going to have a very different relationship to war and poverty and hunger and social justice and wealth distribution and how we treat the environment, to all of it. So that's when I think strategically, like, what is the one thing that's going to then impact a lot of others? That's what I come down on. So that's one message of the book. But what about men? Because the tragic part of it is that this system of toxic masculinity that we have been living out of for the last several thousand years, that has this kind of twisted definition of what it means to be a man. It's like, it doesn't work for anybody. Like, of course, it hasn't worked for women, and the lack of equity and justice and equality and the oppression of women is like, that is still so prevalent in this world, is like no longer acceptable or sustainable. And men are also paying a price for that. So let's look at a couple of numbers. Like, if you look at longevity in the US, women outlive men by 5 years. If you look at the global numbers, they outlive men by 7 years. Look at suicide numbers. In this country, men commit suicide 4 times as frequently as women. 70% of the suicides in this country are committed by middle-aged white men, which, interestingly, are the ones who still hold the majority of the power in this world. So what's up with that? What is not working? And I think that part of what is not working is that it's this twisted definition of what it means to be a man. And so we walk around because it's like we were saying earlier, somebody decided that the emotions were weakness and little boys don't cry. So we walk around so threatened about not being masculine that we turn into these unfeeling, uncaring robots. Yeah. And there's a price to pay for that. Right? Like what used to be spiritual teaching that everything is energy. Now we know from quantum physics that it's true. Right. Energy cannot be destroyed. So what does that mean? That the body is energy, even though it feels solid. The emotions are energy. That's all they are. They're not good. They're not bad. They're not strength. They're not weakness. They're just energies coursing through our bodies. And so whenever we suppress those emotions, they don't go away. Right? They stay in the tissues of our bodies, and only a couple of things can happen. So we suppress, and then the next unfortunate being just says something to us the wrong way, and volcanic eruption.
For sure.
Right? All that repressed anger like just comes out inappropriately, and we cause harm to our relationships. Or suppress. That energy has to come out one way or the other, so it starts seeping out and showing up in physical symptoms, heart attacks, cancer, ulcers. So we've got to get this right. We've got to figure this out and get right with our emotions. And you know, as far as I'm concerned, to be able to know what we're feeling and be able to define it and be able to communicate it responsibly, owning that it's our emotions, not dumping them on each other like we tend to do, like owning it's our emotions and learning how to communicate them courageously, because it's always going to take courage, and compassionately, without pointing the finger and without blaming and without, you know, like owning our experience and our part of it, is to me, and gracefully in a way that the other person can actually hear them. All that is like nothing less than mastery. It's the opposite of weakness.
Right. Yeah. No. Fair point. Absolutely. I never made it to the other end of the bridge there into making that mastery. But you know, I am very familiar with not being familiar with my own emotions, right? And going and doing the research, being like, oh wow, I really don't know what these are. What are some tools that you like to use to help males get in touch then with their emotions, and to your point too, how do you express them gracefully? Because my history has been, oh, I found these emotions, but like there is no grace to how I express them, right?
Right. That's a great question. I'll tell you what I did, because I was clueless myself. And here's the thing. My dad, a psychiatrist, and a good one, because I've heard from people after he passed, I used to go to him and he really helped me. So I know he was a good psychiatrist, but in relationship to his own emotions, the guy was clueless. And so I grew up clueless. I couldn't tell you what I was feeling because I had no idea what I was feeling. So when I started doing this kind of work, like, the becoming self-aware, and I realized that this was an area that I needed to do. So this is before cell phones. I had a timer from Radio Shack, and I would set it on the hour, and I found a list of emotions, and educated myself about what they meant. So I had this grid, like every day of the week and by the hour, and the emotions on the other side. And so at the hour it'd go off, and I go, am I feeling this? Am I feeling that? Am I feeling this? Maybe that could be. And little by little, I did that for several weeks until I started becoming more emotionally intelligent. And in terms of how to communicate them, it's another big question. But the main thing is to realize that it's our emotions. Like, nobody out there can make us feel anything unless there's some wound in there that's being hurt, right? So it's our emotions. Like say, let's just a quick example. Say that you and I both have lunch with our friend Joe every week, and Joe inevitably shows up late, 20 minutes. There I am on Mondays. It's like, I knew it. He's so selfish, so irresponsible, so only cares about his own schedule, blah, 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 and all the other stories that we make up about stuff like this. Whereas it's like, great, Joe's late. I have 20 minutes. Let me go online. Let me return a phone call. Let me just do it. There's so many options, so many possible responses to somebody showing up late. Why does it get me so pissed off, right? So that's what I mean by owning that it's our emotions. And it doesn't make Joe's lateness or anything else right. But it's not about that. It's not excusing anybody's behavior. Like, that's not the point of the conversation. If we want to be free, we start from that place that it's our emotions. And that's why this book is it's part of a series on what it means to live heroically. Because it's work, right? To be able to be willing to go inside and to feel the stuff that sometimes we spent a lifetime running away from feeling, and to look at patterns, to understand why we do the things we do, why we sometimes sabotage ourselves and sabotage our relationships, sometimes from the get-go by attracting people who are not a match, people who are not available. Like, it's work to figure all this stuff out, but it's incredibly rewarding and liberating because we can bring choice back into the equation. So to go back to your question, how do we communicate emotions responsibly, owning that they're ours, and then using, it's like basic communication stuff, like using I statements. So rather than saying you did this or you always do that, like the other ego that doesn't even know that it's an ego yet, that doesn't understand what the ego construct is and why that makes us do the things we do, and that gets us so defensive and takes everything personally and feels so victimized by others and by life. So it doesn't even know what it is. The only thing it can do is defend, right? And especially when we use words like you always do this or you never do that. It's like they might be looking you in the eye, but they're not even there. They're going back in their mind. They're going back in time to that one time in 2009 where they didn't do that. And so then they get to be right and say, well, that's not always true. I don't always do that. So using I statements, and here's a really good formula. When you do this, I feel. Right. So when you show up late, I feel disrespected. I feel dishonored, and I don't like this feeling. I love our relationship. I love our friendship, and can we do this a different way?
Yeah,
right? That's what I like to have a conversation with Joe about.
No, yeah, Joe, you got to stop showing up late, man.
And stop wearing that patchouli, for God's sake.
Come on, Joe. The idea too is that this gives you an opportunity, if you're owning your emotions, to go in and just look at that, right? What is triggering me to get pissed off at Joe, right? Why am I so angry with Joe just because he's late, right? I got a whole bunch of other things like we're spending this energy on, and I'm pissed at Joe, right? I'm never gonna get this 20 minutes back. And while I want to blame Joe, it's not Joe's fault. And then the other piece that you're talking about, when you do this, I feel that, I recently read like a validation book, right? Because I'm not a great validator, Christian, just so we all know. But I'm getting better. Your feelings are always valid, right? So that's never a false statement. I guess
that's right.
Saying. So that's what allows that person to not be defensive when you make those I feel statements.
That's right.
Okay. Awesome.
That's right.
Thanks for sharing that. That definitely it's helpful.
Yeah, and it's worthwhile work is if we do the work, if we take, whatever time it takes to figure it out, it's like when we zoom out a little bit, it's like, wait a minute, it's not just when Joe is late that I get pissed off, it's when anybody shows up late. So what is that? Right? It's not really about Joe. And if I zoom out a little further, it's not even just about being late. It's when somebody, cuts me off in conversation or cuts me off in traffic. It kind of evokes the same kind of feeling, the same kind of frustration or anger in me. So what is that? Right. And so if we are willing to do that work and go back in time and to begin to see how did that pattern start, which most of the time is going to go back to something from childhood, probably in relationship to mommy or daddy. And what's at the core of it is like we don't feel valued, right? Like at the core, like underneath the anger, it's like we don't feel respected. We don't feel valued. We don't feel like he's valuing his time more than he's valuing mine. And that's the unhealed wound that's getting triggered in this present situation. But the wound is much older than my lunches with Joe.
Yeah. No, it's like feeling off a scab to a wound that never quite healed.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
I mean, it's a disgusting visual. There it is. All right. So, Kristen, got a couple questions for you real quick here. I kind of liken this show to like a spiritual speed dating show, right? Like somebody's going to come on and it's a spiritual speed dating. And like, what's Christian got for me? So I'm gonna say, hey, Bachelor number one, out of a couple different questions. Hey, Bachelor number one, what is your one wish for the world?
You know, and I'm not a good one for speed dating. But if we really got who we are, which is connected to understanding that we're not the ego, and really quickly, if we here's a great way of understanding the ego. If you put a baseball in the center of a stadium, that's the ego. Who we are is actually the freaking stadium. And we've allowed this tiny, tiny, tiny part of who we are to think that it is all of who we are, and to make really important, critical, consequential choices from its very small, limited, and always fear-based perspective. So if we got who we really are, that would shift everything. It would shift our relationship to ourselves. It would shift our relationship to each other. It would shift our relationship to the planet.
No, I love that visual too. And I guess that brings up the question too, is like, how do we make that conscious shift to connect to our power? How do we make that conscious shift to realize that we don't have anything left to be afraid of unless we're hanging out in the desert with lions?
That's right, and that's buy this book. No, but seriously, the book will walk you by the hand, and it'll help you understand the ego's like in complete humility. I don't know, like, to me, this is the simplest way that I've seen of explaining what the ego is, so that we can really get it, so that we can get what the self-made prison of the ego is, so that we can let ourselves out, because nobody else is going to let us out of our self-made prisons. They can't. Only we can do that. And only we can step into our own power. Nobody can do that for us. But it takes work, right? We've got to get clear about why we do the things we do, and in which situations do we give our power away. Or, does it tend to be in romantic, intimate sexual relationships, or do we tend to give our power away with authority figures, bosses, coaches, religious leaders, that kind of thing, parental figures? And so once we are willing to do the work and look at the patterns, then we can cut it out and stop giving our power away and stepping into our full potential as human beings, because ain't nobody else going to do it if we don't.
Right. I think that a couple of things I enjoyed about your book too, since you brought up these questions. You've got these questions just like this that help you to identify the patterns at the end of each chapter. You give out the layout. You say, all right, well, here's the information, but here's how you can apply it, right? Go ahead here, use some of these questions, detect the patterns, and then, to your point, you get to know where is it you are giving your power away, and stop it, right? And again, that becomes a choice. That becomes a choice, right? And at least at that point in time, you recognize that you're, in this position of your own power, and you get to at least determine to do it consciously, right?
Exactly.
In the end, that's what freedom is.
Yeah, that's it. You just nailed it. Because there are times where it may not be in our highest interest. Like, we may not be in our highest interest to really step into our power in relationship to our boss until we have something else lined up. Or if we're being, somebody's holding a gun or a knife in a dark alley, that may not be the best time to say, oh, well, this really doesn't work for me, right? Just hand over the freaking wallet and walk away with your life. So yeah, of course, we're going to be smart about this. So I think you're right. I think it's about choice, bringing choice back into the equation.
Christian, thanks so much for finding me and offering to come on the show. I've enjoyed the conversation. I've enjoyed the book that I've read. The bulk of it so far. You've got some great TEDx talks. Where else can I send people to come find out more about you?
The book is available on Amazon or your local bookstore, wherever books are sold. And it's Awakening the Soul of Power is the title. And in terms of reaching me, probably the best way is my website. And from there, they can access my social media. And for any of your listeners who sign up to be on my email list right now, they'll get a sample chapter of the book about what it means to live heroically in the 21st century. They'll get some of the power practices that you were talking about, because they're designed to help us apply the teachings to our life. Like, we don't need more information. We've got information overload. What we need is transformation. And that's what these power practices are designed to do. Is to,
that's going to be my soundbite right there.
There you go. And so that's what they're designed to do, right? To bring about transformation in our lives, so that we have the kind of lives and the kind of relationships that we really long for and deserve to have. And then they'll also get a guided meditation on and a teaching on trust, which, I think it's very supportive in these chaotic and times of uncertainty.
So there you go, guys. I think that if you're looking for a pretty powerful book to help you along this journey, go check out Christian.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on the show again, Brandon. I love your approach to spirituality with its irreverent sense of humor, and grateful for the connection.